This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Warning. This episode contains mentions of domestic violence, which may distress some listeners. I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that swaps out the depressing news headlines for stories of hope that won't make the front page. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard road, but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully, they inspire you to look for the good in your own life as well. Episode 13, Jon Owen. Jon Owen is a peculiar man. Now, I mean that in the best, most endearing way possible, don't get me wrong. And let me explain why. When most of us either hear about or experience hard stuff, we shy away. We try to protect ourselves. But Jon, he leans in. He puts himself on the line, and he has done time and time again. For 25 years, Jon has opened up his heart and his home to people in desperate need of shelter, food, and a little bit of love. People from all walks of life. I don't think I've ever met anyone more like Jesus than Jon Owen, and I'm so excited for you to meet him. Tell me a little bit about yourself. If someone was to say, who is Jon Owen, what would you say to them?
I'd start off by saying I'm pretty much a splendid nobody, which I'm the only son of 4 kids to my mum and dad, who migrated from Malaysia to Australia in the mid-70s. I was just a newborn. Then grew up in suburban Melbourne, going to a church in the city, now called Cross Culture Church of Christ, was called Swanston Street Church of Christ back in the day. And around my high school years, really had a deep experience of my faith, and my love for Jesus really came online about then, and began to serve through a group called Urban Neighbours of Hope, a small faith-based order that has puts teams into some communities around Australia and also Bangkok and New Zealand. Amazing organisation, amazing passionate people. Was there for about 20 years, and then took up a call and an opportunity to become the pastor and eventually CEO of the Wayside Chapel, which is based in King's Cross and also Bondi Beach, serving some of our city's most struggling, poor, disenfranchised, and building community in that space now. So there's a very long answer other than splendid nobody.
I was going to say, you say you're a splendid nobody, but what you're saying after that doesn't really match up too well. Jon, let's go back for a second. You said you had a deep experience of your faith when you're in your high school years. Can you tell me about that?
I was very lucky to be raised in a family where both parents were Christians and with regular church attendance and a youth group too. So when I went through my adolescence, I was able to process that with a group of peers who was asking the same questions. What does it mean to be an immigrant in this country? What does it mean to be someone who is grappling with the scriptures, and what relevance does it have to my life and to this world? And so it was through the beautiful input of youth group leaders and mentors that I was able to explore my faith outside of the context of growing up in a Christian family. And so it's an experience I'm so grateful for. I'm so grateful for the people that were placed around me at that time that God put into my life. And then it was just a standard Sunday sermon one day when the call was put out, and one that I'd heard 1,000 times but had never really resonated with my heart, to not to accept Christ into my heart. That wasn't the call. It was to serve. And it was through that experience and that moment that I knew that in some way, shape or form, my life and faith would be something that would be a central concern of mine. Then I got baptised on December 19th, 1993. It's a date that's etched in my mind as a significant moment where I said, yeah, this is how I want to live my life moving forward. Then I went to university, and that kind of all fell apart a bit as the kind of safe container of life and faith and community kinds of is you're exposed to a whole different world with different ideas. But I was very lucky again to be at university at a time of ideas and exploration, was very much encouraged, and there were great and lively debates between the Christian Union and the Christian groups and the atheist groups, and campus life was vibrant, and it was a fun time. You got to listen to bands. I remember Regurgitator and Custard would regularly play at while we're sitting there eating our sandwiches at lunch, and ideas were debated in the public forum. And then Tony Campolo, that famous evangelist, was visiting, and he said to everyone at the university campus, he said, you're all privileged. The fact that you're in university suggests that much. And he said, well, how about you take a year off, and instead of traveling and having wonderful experiences, why don't you just take off a year to go and serve? And so that really hit me in the heart. And I said, I'm not going to go overseas. I love that Mum and Dad raised us in suburban Australia. This is a country that's accepted us. And so I want to serve in this country. And so that kind of sparked a whole fresh kind of search, and really refound my faith through that process when I heard about a group of passionate people who were not just going out and preaching, but, going into neighbourhoods where there were higher rates of what you call lower socioeconomic communities, and weren't just going in there to talk, but going in there to live. They moved into those neighbourhoods, threw their doors open. Hospitality was at the centre of it all, taking people from the streets. And I thought, wow, there's a way I can serve Jesus. I'm not actually really down for standing on a street corner preaching, but I can open my home and love people. And that was that really kick-started. It was only meant to be a 2-week kind of thing with Urban Neighbours of Hope, but that lasted 20 years and continues on now at the Wayside.
Just like that, Jon quit his university studies, a double degree of computer science and electrical engineering. But he did not leave without lessons.
What I found was that engineering was really great at teaching me how to pull the world apart, but I really felt it wasn't really teaching me how to put things back together again. And I really feel the call on my life is to help people put things back together again.
So that's exactly what Jon did. He joined an organisation called Urban Neighbours of Hope, which shows God's love in the most practical of ways. They move into communities that need hope, open their doors, and literally take people off the street into a safe space. Jon felt that was his calling, so much that he took a vow of poverty.
We took on lifestyle commitments, and that was around for some very important reasons. One is, we looked at what are the kinds of movements that can really sustain themselves for the long haul. And we saw that it was the groups of committed people who were able to take some pretty strong lifestyle commitments to service, simplicity, and obedience. The main reason, apart from sustaining ourselves in that kind of pursuit, is we live still in times where it's all about onwards and upwards and accumulation and getting on that hedonic treadmill. And, we have less and less time for the things that really matter. So how do we put some stakes in the ground and make some intentional commitments around saying, no, we are going to be place-based and faith-based in this place? Because so many of our people who are struggling and are living in communities where they're marked by a socioeconomic disadvantage, is the world's got no time for them. So how do we actually create lifestyles that say we're going to keep the main thing? Even when you get into, there's a saying in this kind of work, which is we all start off wanting to do good and we end up doing very well, which means, we serve people and someone says, oh, I love what you do. Can you come and speak at my church? And can you go and speak at this conference? And can you go on a tour? And next thing you know, we're so busy speaking about the work that we're not doing it anymore. So how do we create and carve out intentional space to say a big yes to the people the world says no to? And in some ways that mirrors the lifestyle of Jesus, who didn't consider equality with God as something to be grasped, as it says in Philippians 2, and rather emptied himself and took on the form of a servant. So that's the path, and the act with active downward mobility, as we used to say in the 90s. There's a reaction to yuppies, which was young, upwardly mobile. And so how do we stay true to Jesus and true to the call that is placed on our lives is always the challenge.
As John grew into his call, the organisation grew as well, and whole communities began to transform.
Eventually, we were able to have a house for guys. So a lot of us single guys at the time, we opened one house that was helping people come off drugs. So we did a lot of home detoxes back in those days. Then the neighbourhood had a lot of people seeking asylum. So we started another house where we'd take in people who were seeking asylum who didn't have any access to any welfare support. So they would come and live with us. And some of the women on the team began to take in women escaping domestic violence. And then others would take in youth who were at risk of homelessness as well. So we were able to just very practically take people in to welcome the stranger. Matthew 25 was definitely one of the verses that really resonated with us is, whatsoever you do for the least of these, you do it unto me. And, the question is, when did we see you? And, it's when we feed the hungry, when we visit the sick, when we clothe the naked, which means to give protection to those who need it. Literally, sometimes that we would clothe the naked. So, that was the guiding principle for us. And then as we built community together, we were planning churches. Discipleship was a big focus, running groups there. As people saw us living out the way Jesus would have us live and grappling with that, people became curious and our lives became our witness. And we'd say, well, you want to know about what makes us do this? Well, let's open the scripture up and let's have a chat together. And then we have women's discipleship groups and men's discipleship groups till then eventually a few neighbours said, hey, why don't we all get together and really celebrate what God's doing in the life of our communities? We had this one street that when we first moved into it was pretty well known for its drug dealing and its violence and closed doors. And slowly, piece by piece, over 8 years, we began to connect in with the community and neighbours began to connect with each other, and all of a sudden it became a place of danger and a bit of death and despair to a place of life. And it was like walking into the street, and these are some of the most precious memories ever, was like walking into a big home. Everyone knew everybody and we were out there and we were supporting each other. One of the neighbours broke their leg, so when he was incapacitated, the neighbourhood got together and said, we need to take care of this guy, because he busted the leg completely. He needed help with all the basics. And so they all voted me to be the one that helped bathe him every day. I don't know how I drew that short straw. But, just that lovely picture of sharing what we had in common, and very multicultural neighbourhood in Springvale at the time. So we were always sharing each other's food and cuisine and connecting with each other. And so it was about us starting something, but then really stepping back and letting the community take up leadership roles in that space. That was a beautiful model of Christ-centered community development.
Tell me about your wonderful wife, Lisa. When did you meet her? I assume that you met her while you're still in Melbourne?
Yeah. So Lisa has been doing this work longer than I have. So she grew up with the founders of Urban Neighbours of Hope, went to high school with Angie Barker, who they're still good friends to this day. And so when I joined up to do the 2-week course that lasted 20 years, Lisa was the first person I met there. And I said, wow, look, here's somebody living out their life as Christ would have it. And then she looked at me and said, oh, look at this young kid. He needs a few footy seasons to really straighten him up. And, it was, I really got to see someone living out the call of Christ on their lives. And I also had the same values. I think that was the best part. It wasn't, I wasn't going out there looking to meet someone. I get worried nowadays. People put their picture up on an app somewhere, and that's how you connect with others. Whereas I think for those of us who are following Jesus, if we're faithful to our call, we're naturally going to meet people who resonate with those values. And even within Christianity, there are so many different calls that people have on their lives. And I'd urge people to go out and live their lives and see who you meet along the way. For some, there's a call, and there's, just like we took on lifestyle commitments to simplicity, service, and obedience. There are others who have a call for the gift of singleness that we don't often talk about. But, so we met, and was one boy passionately trying to follow Christ and a girl passionately trying to follow Christ being brought together. So we met in Springvale and we started dating, and pretty soon worked out that we were deeply in love. So we got engaged and we got married, and here we are 21 years later.
You're actually planning to go to Fiji on your honeymoon, and you decided to go somewhere else, right?
Yes. So I wanted to go to Fiji for our honeymoon, sit on a beach and get a suntan. And but Lisa had other ideas, and she said, no, this is an opportunity. We were brought together by Jesus, and so let's start our marriage the way we want to continue it, which is with Christ at the center of it. So let's do something off the beaten path, because that's how we met, off the beaten path. So we ended up going to Calcutta for our honeymoon to go and serve as volunteers at the Sisters of Charity set up by Mother Teresa. This was in the early 2000s, so Mother Teresa died in the mid-90s. But her work still goes on, and you can volunteer at the Home for the Dying and the orphanages. So, it was not your standard honeymoon, but one we'll never forget, and one I recommend to others.
That's relationship goals if I have ever heard it. Jon and Lisa packed up, moved to Sydney, and started Urban Neighbours of Hope right here. And he explained the long process of moving to a new place to eventually becoming a safe haven to the most vulnerable.
It's a bit more than just moving into a neighbourhood and throwing your doors open. So we get part-time jobs in the local community. Lisa became a chaplain at the local women's prison, and, we've got kids, so we send our kids to the local school. So we weren't setting ourselves up as missionaries in the neighbourhood. I think there are opportunities, if we're serious about being neighbourhood-based, faith-based people, it's important to connect with the neighbourhood. So, when that first moment you ever bumped into a school teacher at the shops and it kind of messes your head. You say, what are you doing? You're only at school. You don't really exist outside of school. It's important for us to be connected in different things. So, you're the chaplain at the prison. You're also the family that walks their dog around the neighbourhood. You're also the person who shops at my local shops, and we share a barber. We need to be located in at least 2 or 3 different spaces. You work out at the same gym as me. So we weave ourselves into the tapestry of the life of the neighbourhoods in which we are present. And that's a really important practice. Otherwise, if we're just like the teacher, we're single use people. We need to become, who we are in those communities, and really take that seriously, about a grain of wheat falling to the ground and dying to the life of that neighbourhood so that new life can be reborn. So we get known in the neighbourhood, and that's how when I started working at the local high school, that's when a teacher would come up to me and say, one of our students is having a really rough trot at home and they're not really they might be kicked out soon. Would you guys contemplate supporting them in some way? And so then they would approach that student and say, hey, Jon and Lisa or other team members, how about that as an option? They go, oh, yeah, I know them. So we're not just a housing service. Every person who would come to our house would be through a relationship or a connection. And then the neighbourhood, as we got to know neighbours, they had a good finger on the pulse. And we also had a focus on making our house a safe space. So no drugs, no alcohol was to be consumed in that space. You left your conflicts at the door. So Lisa would run, we had a garage there, so Lisa would run groups there and, started running a street Sunday school out of the garage as well. So, all sorts of different ways. And then the families would come along and then it became known as a safe space. So I remember one night we took in a lady who had, was beating on our door to be let in because she, sadly, because of a relationship, and she was being beaten. And then the partner came to the door, but as soon as he saw she was in our place, he almost knew it was not to be entered, because the community had already said, no, this is a safe space. I'd like to think there was a little bit of angels protecting her at that moment as well.
You You're often there for people on the very worst days, their darkest hours. Does it ever get too much for you to carry?
If God calls, God equips, and it's important to sit with that. And I'm not saying, you don't do anything unless you feel a call from God, because, I've never heard the audible voice of God. But if God calls, God will also equip. And yeah, there are moments where, like anything, every call, every vocation that we have on our life comes with passion, and passion is fire. And sometimes, we can get burnt. There's no safer place to be than in the center of God's will for your life. So I consider myself very lucky, very fortunate to have been called into a life that I get to go to bed most nights with my head hitting the pillow, saying, "Yeah, I can feel God just smiling and giving me a little pat on the back, saying, yeah, well done, keep going in that space." And that's a gift. I remember at 18, those angsty teenage years, saying, "What am I here for? What's the purpose of life?" And and going to bed with that hollow feeling, saying there's got to be more to life than this, right? And I've got to say, since that moment where I kind of stepped into Springvale, I've not gone to bed with that thought on my mind even once. And my goodness, to say that, and from 20 to now 45, I'm so blessed and so lucky.
John's servant heart took him on a new journey in 2016, where he began working as an assistant pastor and head of people and culture at Wayside Chapel. In 2018, he became head pastor and CEO of Wayside, an organisation which is a pillar of Sydney.
We started in the 60s, and it started by a passionate couple who just threw the doors open and said, the way church is going, it's broken and it needs to be done different. And at the time, I mean, this is one of the most affluent neighbourhoods in the world now, but it was one of the poorest, with Woolloomooloo just down the hill, and this place was full of squats. So they just went out to people and cared for them, took them food, took them blankets, and then invited more and more people to join that movement. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the 60s, the drug culture hit. Vietnam War was kicking as well, and the military naval base down the bottom brought heroin up, and then the nightclub district. So we're in the heart of the nightclub district, and King's Cross was the centre of Sydney, and Wayside Chapel was the centre of the cross, and it became a place where people would come together, politicians, bikies, prime ministers, corrupt cops, would all kind of meet together and just kind of encounter, and they were all held together in what we call the family of humanity. And right in the middle of the red light sex district, and through the AIDS pandemic, we were right at the heart and at the centre. It's quite an iconic place. The Freedom Rides with Charles Tex Perkins left from the doorstep. The first Institute for Aboriginal Affairs was based at Wayside. Lifeline in its early forms was started at Wayside, not because we wanted to do things differently or wanted to be edgy. We were just always open to hearing the issues that were happening in our community at the time and responding. Healthy Harold started out of, and Life Education started out of Wayside. So if anywhere, which is now an international movement separate to us, but if you've learned about drugs in the back of a van from a giraffe, got old Healthy Harold, and that was started by when the drugs hit, and and young people were dying, and the minister at the time just said, do these young people, have they lost connection with their potential? So, the auditorium in here used to be painted, the roof was painted black with stars. And so as the lights came on, you'd see, and he was just trying to reconnect young people with their potential. So many wonderful things have started. The medically supervised injecting centre started out of here, not as a protest against the government, but because the minister at the time said, I'm sick of picking up dead bodies of someone's sons and someone's daughter every day almost in this out the front. We have to be able to do something differently. So, that legacy continues to this day, as we, through the pandemic, have shut down and gone out to people in housing estates and cared for them. And people have been really nervous as they think about what the future's like. And others have been fine. They're saying, the lockdown is easy compared to doing prison. So we've learnt lessons in resilience from some of the greatest teachers ever through this time. So we're just at the heart of it, just a place just trying to say we're not the solution to the problems of the world, but we're certainly trying to love those who are falling through the cracks in our neighbourhoods.
And although chapel is in the title, Christianity isn't something that's pushed too hard. Although John thinks that probably makes them more like Jesus.
At Wayside, we definitely focus on the verbs rather than the nouns. And we say, if Jesus tells us to love, let's go out and love. Let's go out and care. And Wayside was that place where you could walk in, and there's a chapel right in the heart of it all that's there. It's part of the central to the life of the community. But you're not going to see like crucifixes hanging around the place saying you've got to believe in Jesus to walk past this, because the cost of our involvement with people's lives isn't their souls. We're here to love people. And when someone is able to walk into us on the worst day of their lives and we're there to be able to respond in love and compassion, I think that is something that God would say, good work, well done, that's wonderful. And then without thought of expectation or anticipation of what's to come next, but then we say, at the centre of and architecturally the chapel is at the centre of, as you walk into our community services centre, for an hour a week we close it down, and I stand up the front and we run a very stock standard, very black and white saccharine church service. But still, we say at Wayside we're not much like a church, which might suit you if you're not much like a Christian. And, we have a congregation now that's quite vibrant. Hopefully we can, like all congregations, rebuild post-COVID. And, that has a mix of people who have grown up and perhaps been burnt by faith and organised religion, people who have been abused by members of the faith, and also people who have been let down at key points in their lives by those who are supposed to care for them. And we worship together as one. And, our vision is love over hate. You see the black and white, housed and homeless, gay and straight. Everyone is just welcome in this space, and we kind of have a moment where we focus on Jesus, and the Holy Spirit works in that space and touches hearts in beautiful ways. And I just love the way it creates a safe space for people to encounter God.
John, what have you learnt from the people who have walked through both the doors of Wayside, but also, the doors of your several homes over the last 25 years?
Oh, so many lessons. The greatest presents come awkwardly wrapped. And so learning about what's important in life, what's valuable in life. Lisa once was 8 months pregnant with our eldest child, and there was quite a violent assault happening downstairs and between her husband and wife. And she ran outside and stood in between them with our 8 months pregnant belly, and she said, stop hitting her, because I love you both. And it was kind of that really precious moment where the guy realised that what was happening, and he kind of had this wake up moment. So I learned from my wife that, love gets in the way. Love interrupts injustice where it's happening. And that couple became were good friends of ours. And, it was not long after that he completely changed his life, and he never hit her again, which is a miracle in and of itself, that we thank God for. And they had a beautiful time. But I remember a couple of months later, having a newborn in a tiny place, and it's a lot of tension and conflict. And I kind of yelled and ran out of the place. And that very woman grabbed me by the shoulder, and she just said, don't sweat the small stuff. Don't sweat the small stuff. And so that's what I learned from her. She was my teacher. I've learned from people who are, I think pain is the greatest incubator for joy and comedy and humour and laughter. And here's the other thing. The biggest lesson I've learned is struggle and pain and suffering are not the enemy of faith. Comfort is the greatest enemy of faith. I'll leave that one there for you and your listeners.
John, last question I ask at the end of every podcast episode. How has Wayside and Urban Neighbours of Hope changed who you are as a person?
Well, I think the Western world kind of tries to sell us on this thing that I'm an individual that is born in, that's pre-formed, whereas I'm just a product of the community and the people who are in my life. So it is, through that experience, I'm a much richer, more fuller human being, still with lots to learn, still making lots of mistakes. But also knowing that as I walk in relationship, I discover the purpose that Christ has for my life. So as I continue to walk, I continue to find meaning and purpose in it. So that's how I have changed and continue to change, and it's a miracle that anyone can change at all.
Jon Owen, it has been a genuine pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on Finding Hope today.
Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thank you so much to Jon Owen for sharing his incredible story of love and service. For more information on Wayside Chapel and Urban Neighbours of Hope, information is in the show notes. If you or someone you know has been impacted by domestic or family violence, call 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or visit 1800respect.org.au. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd love to be interviewed for the podcast, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to get future episodes in your feed and tell a friend about it. You can also leave a review on whatever platform you're listening from. I love reading them and I love hearing what you love about the podcast. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'll leave you with this verse, one that I think encapsulates Jon Owen beautifully. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. Isaiah 58, verse 10. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.